Today I'm with Glenn Allan from NAB. Good to have you, Glenn.
Thank you for having me.
Would you be able to tell me what your job entails at NAB?
Yeah. I work for a division of hosting services in technology within the bank, and my responsibilities are mainly for data centre and our storage systems and some server interfaces and servers fleet. So a mixed bag of technology across the thing within the organisation. I do both capacity management, planning, design of the data centre and other aspects like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Glenn, in 2014, you won the Data Center Manager of the Year. This is a major accolade. This is a major prize for someone to win. Can you explain what this prize entailed and how this reflects on the job that you're doing?
Yeah. It was actually for, one of the nice things, I think the best accolade you'll get in your career is when your peers recognise you. Mm-hmm. And this came from my peers in the industry that actually bestowed that honour on me. And it was really about a lot of work that I'd done in the industry and education and other things, as well as running some of the most efficient data centres in the country and some of the footprint and experience we'd had in innovation and other areas of technology.
Okay. So when we talk about data centers now, every organization, every academic is talking about the opportunities that we have with data to collect, analyze, manipulate, and come up with business strategies. At NAB, how does this happen? What kind of data do you collect, and what are the opportunities that you've seen?
I think banking's a little bit different because we're heavily regulated in what we can store and keep, and most of our records still probably haven't changed that much. We are starting to do customer trending and information about what our customers' needs are, and we're trying to understand our customer better through big data and analytics, and that's really important to us because a lot of advertising media now aren't as effective and other things. So we need to be, without being invasive to our customer, we have to understand where they're at today and what their next need is. And that's the primary driver today. You'll hear a lot of talk about some of the data analytics that are going on around the globe. I think in Australia we're a little conservative culturally. We're advanced in our technology, but we haven't stepped into some of the other collection points and other things. But data's changing its dimension. In banking, we're very much master file technology where we have records with only certain information in them. What we'll have to do in the future is reclassify those records and break them into zones so that we can expose them only to certain programs and that sort of thing. So the next generation data management isn't about a pool or a bucket of data, it's about the subtypes of data that sit within that data and how you access that and the security we put over that and who can read it and who can't read it. I think there will be probably in the next 10 years a bit of a reversion to privacy. We've opened ourselves up a lot on the internet with public LinkedIn, Facebook and other technologies. I think we'll see a little bit more of a conservative stand in the next 10 years emerge, and part of that will be keeping their records private. So banking's still fairly regulated. We keep a massive amount of data, but we are quite conservative in what we're doing with it, as opposed to some of the retailers and other things are doing.
Right. In this discussion, I think one of the things that also highlights is that how you design a data center. Do you design a strategy in mind, or do you design in compliance in mind? How do you design data centers in the most effective way?
I think part of that is what we used to do is take IT and dump it in a corner and make the data centre feed it and cool it and do everything else, provide it with power. We didn't look at the location, and we didn't look deeply analytically at what it needed. So now we're designing data centres differently, and we're quite careful about where we put our communications equipment. You know, it's interesting with virtualisation and other things, we've finally seen the server footprint starting to shrink, because we can do more with a single physical asset, and we can put multiple servers within the same server. So that footprint's shrinking while the data is growing and the network is growing. So it's about balancing that growth and bring the network as close as you possibly can to the edge. Now that lowers latency, and it also enables more internet capability and more communication. In the future, we'll probably need not one data centre to run our products. We might need 5 or 6 data centres. We may do some work for our customers on the cloud, that sort of thing. So connectivity has been the mandate for the last 5 years in the industry, to increase your connectivity.
It's interesting you mentioned cloud. I saw a recent report by the Global Cloud Index report 2018, and they said that cloud will be, by 2021, it's going to be 1.3 zettabytes. So this is something that's growing. It's growing in complexity. What are the implications of that for the corporates as well as for the citizens like us?
Yeah, and that statistic's conservative. It's only what will come in and out of the cloud themselves. When you look at the internet, it's more like 44 zettabytes by 2020. So the internet itself is growing at a faster rate, of which the clouds are just a subtype of the internet.
Absolutely.
So, you know, the growth is astronomical, and especially in Asia and in Australia, we're seeing large volumes of take-up of this sort of thing, and storing of information, things like OneDrive and other things, Google Drive, we're all keeping notes on there. Universities share information on there, and other things like that, submit projects to those facilities. So yeah, it's a fairly natural evolution that components will move onto the cloud, and you'll need cloud connectivity. But it's fairly seamless. Most of those things you don't realise you're actually using a cloud technology. So I think we often say in technology, if we do a really good job, nobody notices, right? Yeah. And that's a mandate we have. If our business doesn't see us, then we are providing good service, right? So stay under the waterline is an expression we use. Don't cause any chop or waves.
Yeah. Okay. And on the same breath, I think when we talk about cloud, we also talk about the sovereignty of data, where data centers are going to be located. For Australia, why is it important, or is it important for us to have data centers here in Australia?
Yeah, I think when we look at global trends, it is really important. Certainly in my sector, I have regulators who watch me, and I would need to get certain permission to take anything outside of Australia. And at the moment, I don't believe any major bank is taking any customer data outside of our country boundaries in this country. So it's quite well known, and it's well understood, the method that if you wanted to move outside our boundaries. But there's a great deal of IP too in technology that goes along with it, and we need to be cognizant we need a footprint here. The New Zealand banks several years ago realised that they were, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand realised they were losing a lot of data centre capability in their country. So their response to that was to regulate and to ensure that every major bank kept a presence inside that country. And that gave them the capability to enable sovereignty and to pull switches to actually make sure that they could control their economy. So I think that's still a requirement, and I think regulators are watching it. They're silently there understanding the impacts of this thing, so they won't let us go too far in that direction, and they're cautious about other banks trying to run in this country with no data presence in this country, running offshore. So that's the finance industry. Other industries are a little bit more open, but similar things happen too. And we need to ensure that we have a healthy data center industry as a healthy future. You know, the two are connected. We can't have those options like incredibly efficient transport networks and other things without localised data centres to contain those. And the efficiency of those data centres is critical to those future paths. So many things block if we don't have the capability locally.
Moving on to the future of data centers, I think I heard Sundar Pichai talking about Google investing some billions of dollars into data centers, same with Amazon, same with Microsoft. Is this driven largely by the IT providers like that, or the hardware providers like that? Where does NAB, where does the consumer come in this equation of what we want and how the data centers respond to that?
I think when you look at Google's and Microsoft and even Apple's large innovation, I would argue that that's been driven by the consumers, and they're moving to highly efficient data centres. It's not that they can't afford to run less efficient data centres, but they're being held accountable for their carbon footprint and their energy usage and other components like that. So we're starting to see the community demand a product capability. I think, you know, at NAB we often talk about one day our services should be the point, like when you go and buy cornflakes, you can see with the recommended daily allowance on the side of fats, sugars, other things. Should we as an organisation state that there's 7 grams of carbon being used every year on your savings account? Yet if you move it to this type of iSaver, you're only going to use 5 grams of carbon. Like, the power of the consumer is very real, and I think we're seeing the interface of it with people like Microsoft, who got pounded quite badly by a lot of the green lobbies, and now is one of the largest renewable purchaser in the world.
Again, picking up from what you said on the green and the IT, most of us are unaware of the real impact that these data centers have. Can you explain a little bit on that?
Yeah, data centers have a huge energy footprint, and they are generally at least more powerful and use more electricity than the suburb they actually live in. So people don't understand the immense amount of energy needed to drive them. So basically, some of the larger data centres that we're now seeing enter the market here in Australia, as Australia grows up and matures and prepares for Internet of Things and these next capabilities, we're starting to see what we call hyperscale data centres. And these drive, use more energy than a large town. This is changing the dynamics of the way we think of these things and the responsibility. Some of these data centres are twice as effective as the previous generation of data centres. So while they draw a lot of power, as per today's technology, they're an improvement. The other thing is that we need to look at is, if we want an efficient transport system, delivery systems, if we want to drive down the carbon footprint of what we consume, there's some fantastic technologies out there. Rather than sending a 5-ton truck to my home, could you send an electric drone to deliver the things? And Australia Post is doing testing with this sort of technology as we speak. And it will be very real, a drone delivery. It's happening now in some niche places around the globe. We're just waiting for drone technology to get to a point that it can lift enough weight. Having said that, there's an Australian drone innovator that can lift 60 kilos. So we are actually in the presence of the technology that can do massive deliveries on this sort of technology. So that has an enormous data centre requirement, because it could well be that deliveries aren't to your front door anymore. The actual, like in China, they have a tea delivery service that is based around the GPS address of your phone. So you can order it, it gives you a 3-minute warning of when it's close to you, and if you move, it will deliver it to you. And what people are doing in high rises and things, they're putting their phone out when they get the 3-minute warning on the balcony, and the drone's landing on the balcony rather than deliver it to the delivery box at the bottom story. So they don't even have to walk downstairs. So there's a lot of innovation coming out. We're seeing these sorts of things. So that sort of infrastructure needs a massive amount, and to the second, geo-positioning time frames. So that all requires data centres to run and keep them efficient, and to know where their next pickup should be, and that sort of thing, to keep these birds in the air effectively.
Absolutely. My last question. Australia is part of, this is a large country, large landmass with very little people. How do we go about in our technology innovations? How do companies, what is your advice to companies that want to transform their business digitally? And what's your advice for them?
Look, I think companies need to start networking in this country and understanding what other people are already offering digitally. We all have some digital offerings to different degrees, and if people start asking the question of how can I get more digital service, what will happen is that they'll migrate into it slowly, they'll learn the technology and build confidence in it. Most of our businesses are going to be savaged if we don't move to digital in the next 10 years. So I don't think there's anyone out there that is not going to be touched by this. So there is no business that will survive unless it moves digitally. Now, I think that scares a lot of small to medium businesses when those things come out. They think it's only for the big guys. Traditionally here in Australia, it's actually been the small to medium market that has been some of the highest innovation levels. If you look at technology like virtualisation, it was adopted very quickly in small to medium businesses because rather than 6 servers, they only needed 1. They did it for a very practical reason, but they moved to the edge much faster. And I think we'll see the same thing, and I think we need digital networks, and I mean human digital networks, that interface with each other. And when people start asking the question, well, I deal a lot with your organisation, what can we transform to start doing digitally? We'll see people take small steps, and in 10 years they won't even be able to recognise the business that they trade with in the future. So it'll be a very different time. But my recommendation is do it early, understand it, take the first steps. Don't wait for it to come to you, or you are a victim of it rather than being part of it. And the people that will make the largest margins and the largest improvements will be the ones that adopt.
Glenn Allan, thank you very much for those insightful comments. Much appreciate your time.
My pleasure, and thank you very much for having me.